All right, I'm here today with my buddy Gabriel Ebert. Gabe is from Colorado. He attended Juilliard. He has some Broadway credits here, a bunch of them. He was in Red, Brief Encounter, Casa Valentina, Therese Requin, Time and the Conways. And in 2013, Gabe won the Tony Award for Best Featured Actor in a Musical in Matilda, the musical. He's also been in a bunch of off Broadway and regional things. He's been in 4,000 Miles, where he won the 2011 Obie Award. Lots of film, lots of TV. But I think Gabe is probably best known for starring in a summer season of Chautauqua Theater Company, where he played a supporting role of Dick Miller in Eugene O'Neill's lesser known Wilderness, a Wint Selby story, supporting yours truly in the titular role. Gabe, does that bio sound good to you and accurate?
That sounds very, very on point.
Okay, good. I thought, yes, not everyone knows that play.
No, no, the
Um,
Wint Selby is kind of lost to time, and that's a shame.
it's a shame. It's a shame. It's one of those characters that if you'd only fleshed it out a little bit more.
Uh-huh.
Um, anyway, how are you, man? We promised you entrance applause. We'll give it to you now. Gabe, for those of you only listening today, Gabe comes to us in full ascot regalia with beautiful background behind. So we're very excited to have him on the podcast.
It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
You bet. Okay, so I'm going to take you back. We're going to dive right in. I'm going to take you back to like 16, 17 years old.
Oh, wow.
And I'm going to ask you maybe a difficult question, but if you had been a kind of precocious enough student to have like a mission statement for your college experience of what you think you were looking for, I think I want this in a college. What do you think it would have been?
I If I was precocious enough and I sort of had the focus to know, I knew that I wanted to study drama. I knew that I wanted to be an actor. I knew that I wanted to be in New York City because
Hmm.
that's where I knew that the plays were being done, that people cared about. And I think I would say that I wanted total immersion in craft um,
Hmm.
for acting, and if I'm being honest, as little science and maths as possible.
Worth being honest there. And how do you feel like if you were to look back now at 30 some years old and we're going to now say, all right, I'm going to do this all again. I want to, look at my 18-year-old training. Obviously you went to a fantastic drama school, but is there anything that would have changed about what you think you were looking for in an educational experience?
I don't think so. I think I was very lucky and blessed, and actually, some of my naivete, some of my lack of um, perhaps pointed focus, I think is what actually led me to the place that I ended up. I really wanted to go to NYU, I think, because I wanted to be in New York, and that was New York University. It seemed so. Um,
It's right in the name.
it's in the name, frankly. I only read headlines and titles. That's kind of at least my 16-year-old self did. And so at that point, I thought it was NYU or bust. I actually hadn't really heard of Juilliard until a good friend of mine was in his college auditioning process and was telling me about it. He was a couple years older than I was. And so it wasn't until I was actually in the audition process and I went to NYU and I toured the school and I met some of the professors there and auditioned for them that I realized maybe this wasn't the place for me. And it helped that I didn't get into NYU.
Uh-huh. But why was it not the right place, if you don't mind me asking? Just the math and science, or was there anything else that felt like, well, this maybe is not the right fit for me as I was auditioning?
I do think that my test scores weren't up to the par that they were expecting,
Hmm.
but also just the vibe of the place when I went, the vibe of the students and of the professors, the care and attention that I felt in the audition process. It didn't seem as and this is no knock on them. This was just my personal experience as a young man. It just didn't seem as kind of life affirming, as joyous as my experience when I went to a couple of the other places that I auditioned at, and I felt more like a just like a piece of grain in an enormous mill rather
Uh-huh.
than when I auditioned at Juilliard and felt like I was seen a little bit, or like people looked at me, and the students who were working in the hallways and helping out with the audition process took the time to ask me my name and encourage me to take a deep breath. And I remember feeling just a sort of just a sort of joy, a sort of levity in that experience, and I didn't have that experience when I went to NYU or
So
some other
cool.
schools
I
as
almost,
well.
yeah, I almost dread to ask this question because I fear the number will be low. But how many schools did we audition for?
I think I auditioned for 5 schools.
Hmm. And that's how you do it, folks. You audition for 5 schools and you get into Juilliard. It's just that
Yeah,
easy, right? That's
it
what we
it really
recommend
wasn't that
for
difficult
sure.
at all.
Which other schools did you audition for?
I auditioned for Philadelphia School of the Arts,
Uh huh.
NYU, Fordham, Emerson, okay, maybe one more, and I auditioned for a school in Colorado, University of Northern Colorado, which has a great theater program. And
For sure.
when I was in high school, I was a competitive thespian, so I competed in the
Hmm.
thespian conferences
Hmm.
all 4 of my years in high school, and then I got to go to nationals a couple years and compete at Lincoln, Nebraska, where they held that. And the man who ran the program at UNC was very kind to me and encouraged me to come audition and told me, if you don't get into Juilliard, you better come here. And then when I did get into Juilliard, I called him, and he was very sweet and supportive, and has been since.
I love that. I would say some of your friends would still say you're kind of a competitive thespian. I feel like that's come up a couple times.
Exactly. That's true.
What do you think? So you talk a little bit, and I really think it's an interesting thought of like almost the positive attributes of your naivete back then.
Hmm.
I just love to hear a little bit about like what do you think at 17 you did really well that you go, I'm almost jealous of, like I was so this. What worked for you at 17?
What worked for me at 17, I think, was um, I had a lot of energy, I think, and it was a
Hmm.
mostly positive energy because of, I don't know, various reasons. But I I think one of the things that was a strength is a willingness to try things, to a willingness to throw away the thing that I had prepared and do something totally new. And I think that I thrive on being in an ensemble and on playing with others. And one of the things that I think was a strength is that I wasn't hoarding my own experience trying to make it about me getting into school. Actually, my best experiences of auditioning, like in the Juilliard experience, there was a callback in which maybe 30 people came back, and we all got together in a room with the faculty and played some games. And I remember that my faculty members later telling me that was when they really saw that I'd be an asset to the school, is that I
Hmm.
played well with others, to put it in sort of layman's terms, and that it brought out something good in me and that I could bring out something good in other people. There was a sense of joy, a sense of play.
I love that. We're talking with one of our previous interviews about like what was written down on the audition card, and it does feel like a lot of those words are like what you get in kindergarten, like plays
Totally.
well with others,
Totally.
seems to be having fun. You're like,
Yeah,
great,
exactly.
I'm
I mean,
winning. Yes.
those things in kindergarten, they come back. It's no mistake that we're always talking about our inner child, trying to find that
Hmm.
childlike sense of wonder, all this stuff. And as I've grown older and been doing this for longer, those things are really resonating with me. That I'm trying to find that 16-year-old joy that I had, and that sort of not necessarily the naivete, although in a way I am trying to rediscover that, because I think that was one of my great strengths.
I totally agree. What if you were to go back and like note if you were coaching your 17-year-old self and you say, "Oh, Gabe, you need this. You are missing this." What's something that you feel like you maybe have now learned that you didn't have back
Not a single thing. No, I'm just kidding.
then?
Um, well, this is interesting. When I was auditioning for drama school, I hope I'm not jumping the gun, getting to another question, but I feel like this is
Jump
related
away,
to the
jump
thing
away.
you just asked me. I was very intent on picking pieces that these faculty members would not have heard before.
Mm,
And when I was doing my classical pieces, I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna do the jailer in Cymbeline. He only has this one speech, but it's so weird and it's so good." And they've heard these other speeches 1,000 times. And um, I went to an art school in Denver for high school, Denver School of the Arts, and one of the people in my class, his mother had gone to Juilliard, and she was in group 5 or 6. And so I was able to talk to her when I was a junior and I was auditioning. She was like, "Why are you doing the jailer from Cymbeline? What are these monologues? What are you doing? You got to do Romeo. You got to do Prince Hal." And I was like, "You're insane. They hear 1,000 Romeos." And she said, "No, but they haven't heard yours." And that was a big eye opener for me. And I tossed out the jailer from Cymbeline. I've gone back and reread it, and I thought, man, this would have been a terrible audition piece. But I ended up choosing Romeo and choosing Prince Hal for my classical pieces, and um, bringing myself to it and finding myself within it. And I really thank her for that bit of wisdom that she gave me, that it's not about picking a piece no one's ever heard before. It's about being yourself and bringing that into the room. And I think I was very grateful to have her, because in a way I sort of got that wisdom from someone who'd been in the business and who'd gone through the program as a young man. I was able to get that wisdom. Um, and then myself looking back, I don't know, in ways my journey has been so blessed, and I've been able to really work on some incredible projects that I would be hesitant to go back and tweak things in the past. I'm working on tweaking myself now.
Totally. Yeah. Don't change the timeline. You ended up in
Yeah.
a good place. Makes sense. All right. So let's jump forward to those college years a little bit. You ended up at fantastic school at Juilliard. Um, Give me like one word, or if you need a couple words, a word phrase of what it was like for you. So tell me about kind of the Juilliard experience for you, Gabe Ebert.
In one word.
Or, an amalgam
Under
of words
5.
put together.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would say discipline, family, rigor,
Mm.
craft.
Mm. Seems like a lot of the things you were looking for in that mission statement of, you were
Very
engaged
true.
in the craft.
Very
That's
true.
really great. Okay, this is our game portion of the
Oh,
podcast.
good.
So we're going to try to it's called a college flashback round. I'm going to ask you to remember as much as you can from college. None of this will be important. These will all be silly questions. It's purely a numbers game. So it's just how many questions you can answer. But of course, flair for, if you can make interesting and fun answers, then all the better.
Okay. This is like the lightning round on Family Feud
It's
or something. We're going
it's
fast.
like the lightning round. And just like that, you'll get $20,000 if you win this one. So this is
Fantastic.
fantastic. Really exciting.
Pay off some of these college loans. This sounds great.
Exactly. I believe our record, Megan, is this true? Something like 11 or 12? It's
Oh, my
12 is the
goodness.
record. Okay, so
All
can
right.
you get 12? That's pretty quick. All right, he's stretched. His knuckles have been cracked.
Buddigada, buddigada,
Megan,
buddigada, buddigada. I'm ready.
Topeka bodega, Topeka bodega, Topeka bodega. Okay, Megan, when you are ready, you can count us in. Favorite show you did in school?
The Greeks.
Snack that got you through college?
Uh, Peanuts.
Did you kiss anyone in your class?
Many times. Different people, yes.
Class you never used again in your life?
Oh, liberal arts.
Classmate you learned the most from?
Mechi Aharanwa.
Alumni that you really wanted to be when you grew up?
Boyd Gaines.
Teacher you learned the most from?
Richard Feldman. Rebecca Guy.
Oh, double. Worst fashion choice that you made in college?
Ascot.
Most memorable acting exercise that you did?
Singing Happy Birthday.
Ever possess a fake ID?
No.
Oh, I think the no did not get in there. I heard the dingy dings before the no. It was close. It's the snack that killed you. You
It's
wasted
the
3 seconds on the
snack.
snack.
That's so
That's what it is.
interesting. I had no recollection of what I ate when I was at Juilliard. Eating there, you had so little time to eat. It was mostly just like get sustenance and continue. You know what I mean?
Just shove it in and keep going. I also really appreciate that you clarified many times with different classmates, because that would have been a really funny answer if you're like, many times with this one. We didn't just kiss the once. I kissed her many times.
Well,
Yeah, good answer. Megan, how many did we actually get there? Oh, no. I think 9 or
Oh,
10 feels right. Oh, the
God, it
buzzer
was the
beater was closer
snack. It
than
was the
10.
snack. And the
I think
alumni. Who did I
that's
want to be, you know?
I know. I know it's so much
The
pressure,
the Matthew
what do you
McConaughey
say?
answer is I wanted to be myself in 10 years.
I saw you almost saying it, and I was like, "He's given too much ego in the podcast so far. He can't go back and say
Exactly.
that again. That's not possible."
Exactly.
Not possible. No, that was great. I think it's the worst performance we've seen yet, but really thank you
Fantastic.
for playing. It's really good. Sometimes
Pleasure.
it's the extraordinary lows that also set the bar for
Mhm.
other people to sort of recognize. It's like the Mendoza line is what you've given us
Beautiful reference.
now.
For those of you at home, the
Yes, do you want
Mendoza
to explain
line.
Mendoza line?
No, I don't. This isn't a baseball podcast, but we do
No, it's
love
not.
baseball metaphors. Any
We
sports
do. Yeah.
metaphors, Charlie and I will be using them.
I'll use it. We've already had Steve Nash quoted in the podcast. We're just,
Really?
we're going to use him whenever we can.
Oh,
We
good.
didn't
I'll
have him
try.
on the podcast. We're trying to book him, but we did just have him quoted.
Yeah, yeah. I heard that his Hamlet was brilliant when he was in
Oh,
college.
you haven't seen his Prince Hal.
No,
My God.
no, I haven't. He was running point the whole time.
A little slower look back for the Juilliard years. If you were just, I know you sort of jokingly threw some stuff out there of who you remembered, but if there's like a big takeaway, what's like the biggest thing you're grateful to have under your belt as a professional? Like what you learned in school that you say, "Ugh, I'm so glad I got this from, and maybe specifically from school."
Hmm. That's a great question. So much of the stuff I feel like becomes like cellular. You just work so hard for 4 years, it sort of gets into your body. And then there's things that I use that I probably don't even know I'm using. And I feel like when I am in a play, when I'm doing a run of a play, 8 shows a week, I think one of the things that it really gave me is um, the the knowledge that I have to show up early and work hard, and I have to bring myself to the play each night. And when I was doing Matilda, for instance, I did it for a year, so I did over 400 performances. And some Wednesday afternoons, it can be tough to find the motivation to get up and get to work and give the performance that you're capable of giving. But the privilege of being able to do it, to be in that position, and also the knowledge that there might be someone in the audience who's never seen a play before, or there might be some little
Hmm.
kid in the audience who will be inspired by this particular performance, and they just happen to be here on a Wednesday afternoon, and that's not anybody's fault, that's just the way that it shook out. And so when I'm in a play, I'm one of the first people in the theater. I have a physical warm up. I have a vocal warm up. I do my Alexander technique warm up, and I try and get myself into a position to perform well, much like Steve Nash does as a player and probably as a coach now. I'm finding that harder on film and TV sets because the work is much more ephemeral to me, and I'm still trying to find my way to bring myself to give great performances on film, because I feel like film performances are often so understated and it's so internal what needs to be done. And so if I get there early and I do my physical warm up and my vocal warm up, I find that I can often um, hamper my ability to give a great performance because I start doing things a little too big, or I start doing things with too much energy. And I think when I'm watching my work on film, I find it to be um, a little disingenuine, even though in the moment I feel like I'm bringing my best self. I think that there's something about it, it's more of an internal work that I need to do. And of course, the Juilliard training prepares you for a life in the theater, not for a life on film, which is ironic
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
we look to the alumni who have done great work on film. I might adjust my
And
Boyd
so many.
Gaines answer to Robin Williams, by the way, but that's
Uh oh.
that's
Okay.
regardless. That means I
Boyd,
lose one.
sorry,
Now I
you've
only
lost
get
out.
9 answers. Sorry, Boyd. Boyd will be fine. Um, but so does that answer the question? I feel like maybe I just rambled.
It sure does. It's
Okay.
also a really interesting point, especially it feels like in what is repeatable as a baseline performance from a theater perspective. If there is a little bit of muscle and technique in that, it is really interesting to think that some of those same muscles of repeatability are actually hampering you from a film perspective. Makes a lot of sense. If
Yeah,
it's a different thing to go, can I do this once and really find what comes naturally versus can I deliver this 8 shows a week every
of
time?
course. And if you spend, and I have found if I spend my time on set in a film or something trying to repeat, not only do
Hmm.
I make it less interesting for myself and for everyone on set, but the editor doesn't have as much pure gold to mine through.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
And
Because
that's
they're
what
just
your work
looking.
is. Let's say
That's
it.
what my
Pure
work is,
gold.
babe.
Denver Nugget gold.
Exactly. And so I'm really trying to bring myself to work in a different way now when I go to set, because it's actually every time you do something, even if it's great, you have to throw it away and you have to let it
Yeah,
go.
it's so
It's
true. Well,
almost,
it's a
meditative.
yeah. I was gonna say it's a different sport. I mean, you're the same athlete, but you're playing a different sport when
Hmm.
you're on a Broadway musical versus when you're doing a TV gig or doing a movie. It
Absolutely.
is a it needs a different approach. Is there anything that you feel like I feel like I'm anticipating your no regrets attitude, which I love, but is there anything that you kind of wish you'd done differently in school? If you could look back and go, "Ah, I wish I paid a little more attention in this class, or I wish I had, treated this show a little differently.
Yeah. Um, hmm. I I like to think I brought myself pretty fully every day that I was there, but I do think that I mean, it's tough because you're a kid when you get to college, and I feel like you grow up over the course of it. One thing that I maybe wish is that I spent a little less time trying to indulge in the pleasures of the senses,
Mm,
and maybe I would have been able to focus a little more on some of the technical aspects, the things that I found more boring. In our fourth year, we had a class called The Real World, and I think I resented just the title of the class, but it taught you how to do your taxes. It taught you how to
hmm
um, bring yourself to the business aspect of it, and to be able to, um, yeah, just balance your checkbook and do the simple things. And
hmm
I sort of disregarded that class because it wasn't artistic, and if something wasn't artistic, if something was a little more technical, sometimes I would be slightly dismissive of it because it didn't bring me sort of pleasure in the other ways, and maybe I would then, if I knew that was the first class in the morning, the next day I'd stay out a little bit later the night before, and that kind of thing. So,
hmm
so I think maybe I could have had
hmm
a little more, um, but I guess that's also becoming an adult, prioritizing your time, and
Well,
you
and
can
it
only.
speaks a little bit to one of the. Go ahead. No.
No, I think I was just saying the same thing over again. Carry on.
I was going to say, I think it speaks a little bit toward the specificity of Juilliard in that you have 18-year-old, really college students who you went in at 18, really as a very young man, very mature, but very young man. And then you also have what is the equivalent of graduate students, even though you're
Hmm.
all in the same class, who are full adults in the same class. So I always think it's a really interesting dynamic that you guys are mixed together.
Yeah,
And I'm
and
sure
I
from the maturity levels
lived
are.
with a grad student. When I moved out of the dorms, I lived with Adam Driver, and we were classmates together. And not only was he a grad student, he'd been in the military, so he had all this
Yes.
discipline. He was incredibly rigorous, and um, ran from our apartment in Queens to school every day. I remember trying to keep up with him, and I just couldn't do it.
I remember my best friend Alejandro is also really great, really good friends with Gabe,
And my
um,
classmate at Juilliard.
and your classmate. And I remember I visited would have been your first year, and like took one of your movement classes, and we showed up like early, like 20 minutes early. It's earlier than I ever showed up for class, and
Hmm.
Adam was already in a full lather, like fully was sweating, had already done a full workout, like in the room,
Yeah.
like the first one there.
That's the
Yeah,
Mamba mentality, and you can see that it's served him well.
we'll see how much basketball we can sneak into this podcast. It's great.
Absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about now you've graduated. So you're 22. You may have been 21, whatever. You've graduated now.
I was
Um,
22.
22. Tell me a little bit about what it's like navigating that time. So you've already been in New York City, and now here you are. You're out of
Hmm.
school. You've got this great training, this great reputation of a school behind you. What was it like in those first couple of years figuring out the business, and maybe how did you use the resources of your scholastic training for those first couple of years?
I was very fortunate. Our school, as many of the conservatory programs do, and even non-conservatory training programs, we had a showcase in New York and in LA, and I was very fortunate to get an agency out of that. I signed with an agency, a bi-coastal agency, but I signed with them in LA.
Hmm
Um, in LA during the showcase, actually something went wrong in my scene. Some prop that we had like fell and broke in the middle of it, and I was able to sort of get a big laugh out of it, and it was this
Mm.
really great moment. And so my scene partner and I both signed with the same agency, and we had like some heat, because it was like, oh, these guys can think on their feet, that kind of thing.
They
So
dropped the prop. My
yeah,
gosh.
exactly. Look at them go. So I decided to move to Los Angeles after
Hmm.
graduating with stars in
Hmm.
my eyes. Part I wanted to stay and work in the theater, but my roommate, who was also my classmate, was moving to Los Angeles, so we were giving up our New York apartment. I had sort of felt like what happened in the LA showcase was exciting, and people were like, "You got to come out here, kid. You're gonna be a star,
Hmm.
kid." And so um, I went out there and I ended up waiting tables and just having a miserable 5 months of
Hmm.
auditioning for things that I didn't believe in. I had just been working on Shakespeare and the Greeks and playing these great roles on the stage, and then I remember auditioning for like guy who brings cup of water in these procedural things, and the car that
Hmm.
I had was pretty old, so it kept breaking down, and all the money I made I had to put into the car, and I really started to feel quite desperate and low, which in a way I'm very grateful for. At the time it was brutal, but in a way I think it was very humbling to come out of Juilliard and immediately have that experience. um,
Hmm.
Someone who had seen me in my fourth year said that there was a job for an understudy in this new two-hander play on Broadway, which was this play Red by John Logan. And would I fly out and audition for it? And I had about $600 saved up, and so I bought a flight to New York, and it felt you know it just felt like it was meant to be. And I went in with that killer mentality as well of no one's gonna beat me for this job. I'm gonna get it.
Hmm.
And because I felt like it was a lifeline. I felt like I was kind of drowning out there, and here's a rope, grab onto it, don't let your hand
Hmm.
slip. And so I was able to book that role, and I moved back to New York with this understudy job because it was just a two-hander. I think I was able to make a decent amount of money as an understudy. And
Hmm.
I came back and lived on a friend's floor for a couple months, and then was able to get an apartment and start my life. And that was like a 5 month run, so I was able to get a little bit of money and then start the
Hmm.
process up um and start my sort of theatrical career. And I was able to put enough jobs back to back. I haven't had to wait tables since I was in LA there. But I'm very grateful that I did have to. So I don't know if that's about how the training helped me, but I do think that the the discipline and uh, the rigor that I learned at Juilliard allowed me to come and just do that job really well. And I was fortunate enough to go on a few times in that play, and
Hmm.
um, and boy was I prepared. I was just I was ready to go, and I didn't waste the opportunity. And so I think that that's a credit to Juilliard, and also just to that I didn't want to go back to the place I'd been.
Yeah, a bit of a credit to your hunger as well, which I
Sure,
think is everyone's got to connect with, whether that's literal hunger or, from poverty, or
absolutely,
is the artistic hunger to go. I need this. I need this. I want this.
absolutely.
I was think it's so interesting the allure of LA, even to someone like you who that might not necessarily have been your biggest dream out of
No,
college of like, oh, I want to be a movie star. Like
no,
you spoke about the craft and what you're immersed in and what you want to be doing, but still it's a I mean, I was this close to moving to LA too. So much. Oh, you have to come now. If you're going to come, this is the time to come. And thank
exactly.
God I had a job that I was like, I'm gonna do that job. I don't. This is not. But I really close, even though it's like not part of any mission statement I would have said for
I
myself
know,
of
and
what
it's
I
so
want.
interesting too. The people saying you got to come and you got to come now really don't know anything about you, and ultimately
Mhm.
don't even particularly care.
Yeah,
It's just like they
like
see
there's
that
a chance you could make me money, and
there's
maybe
a
not.
chance you could
And if
make me
not, I don't have
money.
to deal with it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and I am in a position of power enough to say this to you. You're going to take it seriously. You got to do it now, kid.
yeah,
And if they say
yep.
kid at the end, it just makes it feel like, oh, they must be right.
It also makes it feel like they're from the '60s too, which is kind of
Mm-hmm.
nice.
Mm-hmm.
Ah, kid, you gotta do it now.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's so true. But now it seems like you really are finding your way now to a diverse career with TV and film and theater and classical theater. If we're going to even distinguish that, it feels like you really are getting a range of different kinds of artistic expression, which for a lot of people is the dream, the goal.
I am starting to. Yeah, yeah. Very grateful for that. I have not yet gotten to do a professional Shakespeare play, which I lament, but I'm hoping the time
Soon.
will come, and I shall bring myself fully.
Anyone who's listening to this podcast who wants to cast Gabe in a Shakespeare play, having seen him as Richard III in Juilliard's sophomore production, I
You saw
say
that?
yay. Of course I saw it.
Of
I saw
course
you
you
and
saw that.
Ale
That's right.
together taking each half of the show. Brilliant.
Hmm. Thank
Brilliant.
you.
Let's talk a little bit about, are you doing anything to continue your education at the moment? Anything that, like, are you taking any classes, any kind of training, any self-study, other than listening to me talk? I know that's really helpful to you.
Absolutely. This podcast is part of my ongoing education. Um, One of the things that I did during the pandemic, because of course there's no theater, I think during a normal year, I go see dozens and dozens of plays.
Mm-hmm.
And it's tough to be bereft of all of that. But one of the things that I've never quite, an education I've never quite given myself is great film education. I grew up without a television in Colorado, so I never really watched that much film or television when I was a kid. I knew the hits, like my hero when I was young, who I think made me want to do it, was Jim Carrey, because he was the mask, he was Ace Ventura, and I just thought that was it, and I loved Hook, so I loved Robin Williams and that kind of stuff. I wanted to be that kind of a clown. But during the course of the pandemic, I invested in the Criterion Collection, and I've been watching just some of the great films and watching these performances. And especially now that I've had experience going on to set and acting in films, and I always thought when I was young, oh, theater's great, but film must be so cool because you're actually there in the castle and you're holding the sword and the dragon is there and it's so real, it's so cool. And it's the exact opposite. It's so
Mm-hmm.
fake, and it's so sometimes heartbreakingly fake. There's no dragon, there's no
Mm-hmm.
castle. Sometimes there's not even a sword. And
Wait, so when you were a kid, you thought dragons were real, and that meant if you're in
sure,
a film, you have a real dragon there.
sure.
Okay, great, love it.
My imagination was, I grew up without a television, so I played a lot outside. My imagination was strong, which I
Heck
also
yeah,
think is a testament to my parents. I think is part of why I probably have the aptitude for the things that I do.
right on the kindergarten report card. Imagination strong.
Absolutely. Imagination strong, plays well with others, loves games. Um, so it,
You're saying it's fake.
yeah, and it's way more fake than theater, because in the
Mm-hmm.
theater, you at least once you get on the train, once the play starts, you got to go all the way through to the end.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and you get to continue the journey. And if something goes awry, you figure it out. And that particular night, the journey takes this turn. And
Mm-hmm.
there's something real about that because you have to do it. You have to go through it. Whereas, you know, my experience on film, oftentimes, I had this one experience a couple of years ago where I was playing this great scene. It was a really emotional scene with, the woman who's playing my lover. We were sort of breaking up. Our life was falling apart. So we did her coverage to start, and then we took lunch, and we're both like weeping, and she's giving this beautiful performance, and they've got two cameras in on her. She's sort of sitting against this wall in the corner, and I was sitting on a chair like this, and then we take lunch. So there's like an hour, and you eat some food, and you're like, oh man, I'm feeling tired. Then we come back and do my coverage, but because she was sitting against the wall, they're like, oh, she can't actually fit in here, we're just gonna have to put the camera here. Well, you just look at this little dot on the camera. And I didn't even get to look at her, and she was off in
Mm-hmm.
another room sort of shouting her lines. And this beautiful tender scene that we'd been playing, that and when we were doing her coverage, I wasn't half-assing it or anything. I was
Mm-hmm.
invested, and she was, to her credit, invested in the other room shouting her lines to me. It's like, okay, so I didn't even get to look at her, I don't even get to play it with
Mm-hmm.
her, and my coverage now is me fake crying looking at a dot on, I think it was like on the cameraman's arm, and they're just
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah. And so as I watch these great films, I really am having respect and empathy well up in me for these actors. And you think, wow, how do these actors give such brilliant performances under these circumstances? And I think that is the strength of a film actor, is like, there's this great Peter O'Toole quote in this movie, My Favorite Year, or they need him to do a live show, and he says, "I'm not an actor, I'm a movie star." And I do think there's something true to that, that it's a different, it's an utterly different muscle, and so much of it is personal. And even if
Mm,
I'm an ensemble guy. I grew up playing a lot of sports, as you probably can gather from this podcast so far. I love sports. I love being on a team. I also loved
mm,
Juilliard because I was part of an ensemble, part of a class, and
mm,
my classmates' success is my success. And if one of my classmates has a breakthrough, that feels like a breakthrough to me. I feel like a lot of the stuff I learned was watching other classmates have breakthroughs, and you can learn
mm,
great lessons there. Um, but yeah, this thing of watching great performances on film, I have a lot of respect for these actors who do it, and just think like,
mm,
man, this beautiful thing I'm weeping at, the other actor might not even have been on camera. They shot that on two
uh,
different days. I try
mhm,
not to let that infiltrate my mind too much, because then I can't enjoy the film. But I do think, wow, how do you bring yourself to that work? And that, I
yes.
feel like, is a new training. And I'm watching these great films, and I feel like that's a good part of my education for not only just the history of the craft, but of the work that I'm want to be doing moving forward. And I
Yes.
think so many things are moving towards the screen, because people are more and more want to be in their own homes, and I think people are scared to go sit in a theater of 1,000 people. um, and so even plays now are being filmed.
Hmm.
And so I want to be able to deliver those things, and be able to watch them with less self-loathing.
It's so true. And I have really gained a lot of respect, actually, not just for the great actors of film, but like the average actors of film. Like, it's really
Absolutely.
hard. Like, people that I would have as a kid been like, oh my God, you think that person's a good actor? Like, they're just like standing in front of a green screen. And it's like, no, that's really hard just to
Yeah,
like
can you
pretend
imagine going and
accurately.
standing in front of a green screen, and it's like, no, there's 1,000 ants crawling on you. Go.
Yeah. You're like, oh, it looked a tiny bit hokey. It's like, yeah, because there was nothing there. They're doing their
Exactly.
best. It's very hard.
Exactly. And those people probably get less time to do it. They shoot the stars all day, and then they're like, we have 10 minutes left. Will you stand there in front of the green screen and do your ant thing? And you realize these moments of like, but you as a professional, you got to deliver, because that's going to be your
Yeah.
moment on screen. And nobody
Yes.
cares what your day was like. Nobody cares when they watch the movie that you were sitting in your trailer for 14 hours before you got called to set. Nobody cares.
Yes. Yeah.
So
This ant thing seems so specific. Is that made up, or did you have to once be covered in ants?
I didn't, but I did once have to burn to death.
Oh my!
And so
Just
I had to
full of
enact
nightmares.
being burned to death, and then I watched my stunt doubles actually burn, and it was like a whole
Uh-huh.
day of shooting the sequence where I self-immolate.
Self-immolate. Well, speaking of self-immolation, let's get into a little bit of a wrap-up moment for the pod. I'd love to, this is a question that I'm maybe I need to ask better because I'm not sure that I'm always um, getting quite the question across that I'm trying to ask. But I'd love to kind of know from your experience working with recent grads of colleges, so let's say 22 to 26-year-olds or something. What do you feel like these young adults know, with a capital K, know more than like our generation of actors do? So, what do they understand about the world and the business that we can really learn from them?
I think they understand the camera, because they have grown up with iPhones in their pockets and taking
Mm,
pictures of everything in a way that we didn't. I think I got my first iPhone when I went to college. Um, I think that they understand how to market themselves on social media, how to be advocates of their own brand.
mm-hmm.
Um, I sort of eschew social media. I have none, and in a way, I'm
Except
quite
when you
proud
post
of.
this podcast.
Exactly, and in a way,
Hmm.
I'm quite proud of that, because I feel like with the positive elements of social media, there comes a lot. A bright light casts a dark shadow. And I feel the
Hmm.
shadow very much, but I do see
Hmm.
some of my colleagues really able to market themselves and monetize their talent, in this way. Um, how about that?
That's a great answer. Yeah,
Okay, cool.
absolutely. Yeah. Um, how do you feel? And let's get into maybe some of the ways that the industry is changing, especially in this past year of 2021. When we talk about demands for equity, or when we talk about, sort of the way that the industry may be changing to be a more virtual industry, as you talk about, our plays being filmed and, our auditions happening more on Zoom, even when we come
Hmm.
back. Um, I just love to hear kind of your thoughts on where this industry is and where you think it's going, and how that world is going to affect the business that we thought we knew.
Yeah. Uh, well, one of the main things that I think affects an actor is most of your auditions now are self tapes. When I was coming up, uh, when I was coming up in my day, 10 years ago, whatever, it was you would go into town, you would
Hmm.
walk into an audition room, you'd sit in the waiting room with a bunch of other guys that look like you, and you'd be like, oh, what's this guy gonna do? Well, yeah, you could maybe even hear people through the walls, and you had to bring yourself to these auditions quite literally and figuratively. You had to bring yourself to the room and in a way win the room. And I think one of my skills is I am was able to win rooms, and I think that's how I was
Hmm.
able to have success in the theater early on. Now all of my auditions are on my own iPhone. I just make them at home.
Hmm.
And that is a strain sometimes on my relationship because you have to lean on your partner to make these things with you, especially during the pandemic. If you're not in a bubble with someone, the only person that you can make a self tape with is who you live with. And I also
Hmm.
have friends who live alone, and so I've read for them on Zoom, or I even have a friend who recorded their own the other lines on a computer,
Hmm.
and you press play, and there's just such there's I really feel like that's not only a detriment to the joy of being an actor, but it's really hard to get give a performance that would get you a job.
Hmm.
And it's really easy to get discouraged when you look and you're like, well, all these jobs are going to stars anyway. And
Hmm.
how can I possibly do my best work? And some of the sides I get are like crazy to audition
Hmm.
for. And it's like, okay, there's four characters in this scene and I have to be screaming, crying. At one point I pull out a clump of my hair. It's like, how am I supposed to do that in my own home and not put this stress on my relationship or on my
Hmm.
friends? And you want to prepare a certain amount, but you also, it costs you to prepare a certain amount, especially if you feel
Hmm.
like the odds of you getting the job are pretty small. So I think that's one of the things that's tough. There's this interesting sort of trend in show business where all these commercials are like real people, not actors.
Oh
And
my gosh, I know.
actors are being maligned as like they're not
Yeah.
real. They're um they're fake people. They have simple
Hmm.
lives. Often they're portrayed as being really stupid. What's
Hmm.
my line? What's that? And like they just sort of look, and that's all they can do. And there's this it's almost looked down upon to be an actor, even though all anyone's doing is sitting and watching content.
Hmm.
And so I don't know, there's this tricky balance to strike in terms of being hungry enough for your career to be able to make these auditions and do good work and invest in them and make them well, but also protect your heart, your spirit, your soul enough to live a life that you can be happy with. Um,
Hmm.
And I feel like that's one of the ways that the industry is changing that can be really tough. And even if you get past the self tape phase, then your test for the audition is probably going to be on Zoom and or on
Hmm.
Zencaster, and that provides challenges of its own. And even though you're acting and doing the thing, you're sitting in your bedroom,
I
and
know.
that's I think that's really tough. And I think that it's hard on people's psyches to do that.
Maybe especially so in New York, where most people don't have a three-bedroom with a
Of course
beautifully
not.
set up studio where you can, this is where I do my work. Like, Elizabeth, my partner, had like so many auditions during the pandemic. Just like all of a sudden, she's out of her Broadway show and she's like, let's all do TV. Let's make all this happen. I mean, these are all happening in our living room/kitchen where we're trying to like live our lives because we had a 1-bedroom apartment.
Of course.
And the number of times that, like, especially when I'd be in the middle of a busy day, that I would have to do a reading where I was the star, not she. I was like, you really need a lot of acting from me. I mean, of
Yeah,
course, that's how these go. Like,
absolutely.
4 characters for me, 1 for you. Okay, here we go. Like,
Yeah, and it's
do I
tough
have to
then
prep
to
this?
say like, "Oh, I'd love to do another take," because your partner's like, "Yeah, but I'm doing so much else." And my friends who have children,
Yeah.
I really feel for them trying
Oof.
to balance. You'll know that soon, my friend. To balance
Mhm.
being a parent and trying to do this thing, and having the ambition to invest in it, but but also
Sure.
to protect your life enough to be like, okay, we're only going to spend 1 hour on this, and I'm
Uh-huh.
so grateful, and I have two tomorrow. you know
Exactly. Well, and because it always feel I would watch her feel selfish as she went, "Could we try it again?" And I was like, "Yes, of course. Like this is we're investing in us together. I want you to be successful too. I
Yeah,
want that." But it's also like in the moment, I'm like, I don't really want to do it again though.
of
Like if it's
course.
it's like that balance of you're. It's like, is this vanity? But no, I think she goes, I got another good take in me. Let me try it again.
It's true, and
It's tough.
the tough thing too is the camera can read that. The camera can read defeatism. The camera can read
Mm-hmm.
shame, and
Mm-hmm.
um, it's hard to get that out of your eyes some days when you're asking whoever it is to make the tape with you, and you feel defeated, like, I probably won't get this anyway, and I'm
Uh-huh.
so sorry, I have to ask you, I just need one more take, I didn't get the lines right. To
Uh-huh.
then you know pop it
Yeah.
on and be able to deliver that. So I think
Yeah.
that that's one of the real challenges for actors moving forward. And I do think that the younger generation who has perhaps been on Instagram, who does Instagram stories, I want to call them, where
Sure.
they're
Sure.
filming something that happens during their day, they're more comfortable just doing that. It's not a big deal to them
Mm-hmm.
to be like, oh my God, look at the thing that's going on, and I'm totally relaxed and in my body and in my life
Mm-hmm.
here. Whereas I don't have any social media and don't have anything like that. So when I film something, I'm like, I look at myself. I can't believe I look this way. Is that really what my voice
Mm-hmm.
sounds like? No, no.
The other thing I had to comment on, which is because I've been doing so many voiceover auditions recently,
Mm,
and the number of times they'll say, like, not an announcery voice, a natural sounding voice, and then every other word that they use to describe it makes it sound like an announcer. Like smooth, charming, sounds really confident, sounds whatever, but
hmm.
not never hokey. This is all just so net. You're like,
Yeah,
this is an impossible line to stride sometimes.
exactly, exactly. But I did watch you walk that line as you played Wint Selby, and so I know you're capable.
Exactly true. Exactly. Hey, kid, come on in. You got to come here.
That's right.
Uh, I'll last wrap with one more question, just not to ask you to be more inspirational than you've already been so beautifully, but if you did have a piece of advice that you're being now that mom who helped you through your Juilliard audition, and you're looking now at a 17-year-old who's maybe about to start their artistic journey, what would you feel like I really want to tell this young person?
This is what I would say, especially as you audition for colleges. I think it's easy to get caught in the trap of they only take so many people. They only the program only has 18 slots. The program only has 25
Mhm.
slots. And I think the thing to remember is these programs are looking to accept great students. They're not looking to turn away students. And I think it's easy to get caught up in they're going to turn away so many people. And it's better to focus on they're going to accept this many great people. And I could be one of those people. And to bring yourself to the moment of remembering that the reason you're in here auditioning is because you love doing this and you want to study it, and not that I'm worried I won't get into these programs, or that I know that they only accept 10%. To think they accept 10%, and they really want a great 10%. And I
Mhm.
think to if you can put yourself in the mindset of they're looking to accept great people rather than they're looking to turn away mediocre people, you can give yourself a more life affirming experience, and you can I think you can do better work and bring yourself to that moment.
I love that. I think that may be not terrible advice for professionals who might tell themselves all the parts are going to stars anyway, you know?
Maybe I need to say that to myself every once in a while.
I feel like that this is the experience of therapy for me. I've started therapy. It's okay, world. I've
Good
started
for
therapy
you.
this year.
That's great.
And the experience of therapy almost always is my therapist saying, "Well, what would you say to yourself if you were?" And it's always like, "Yes, I can give that advice to someone else, but why can't I take it?"
Of course.
Because I
Of
feel like we
course.
know everything we need to know. We just so often get in our own way.
Yeah, we can only just say it to other people.
Yeah, but obviously, what Gabe needs to do is this.
Hmm.
Okay, what do you need to do? Yeah,
It's true. Yeah, if you
it's
know
so
what I
fun.
need to do, by the way, please let me know.
Yeah, that'll be the second episode of this podcast. We'll do this. Will be. I'll just give you some life advice, mostly fashion oriented. Mostly it's Ask God related advice.
Thank you.
Gabe, thank you so much for coming on the pod today. It has been such a pleasure getting to chat with you.
It's been a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.